the majority of couples who believe that the husband should make the final decision don't act it.
Hi, everyone. Today, I'm joined by two lovely ladies that are responsible for this. I've read this book and I highly recommend. So right off the bat, let's just get that out of the way. So I'm joined by Sheila, Wray, Gregoire.
Gregoire, that's pretty close.
Great.
You did great.
And Rebecca Lindenbach.
Yes.
Who happen to be a great mother-daughter team.
Yeah.
And have collaborated on this book. And so many of you may have heard about it, but I wanted to have you guys on to discuss this because in my work, I see this as a pervasive issue. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of very damaging, unhealthy, spiritualized teachings about sex that are doing a lot of emotional and physical harm, actually, to people. And then they feel trapped because it's what God wants them to do.
Yep.
And so I'm super grateful for your work. I've already talked to many ladies who have felt relief and validation from just reading what you're talking about in the book. And you do some great research. That's the other thing that I really found exciting, because it's not just like we're reacting to something. It's like, no, we actually talk to people and this is what we found. And this is like statistically relevant. Mm-hmm. And I think that also aided in a lot of the ladies that I've talked to who have read the book in their validation of their own feelings. Like, I'm among a bunch of other people that have gone through this. So what has been the biggest surprise that you've had after having gone through I'm just finishing a book myself, but having gone through the whole process, which is a big deal. Mm-hmm. What's been your biggest surprise about the process that where you're at now that the book's published and you're getting feedback?
All three of us co-authors are still close friends.
Yes.
Yeah, we do have a third. We have a third member of our team, Joanna Sawatsky, who's our stats expert. And yes, that was when we were going into it, we were all like, we're all going to like each other at the end of it.
Yes. It was intense. We did a survey of 20,000 women.
Yeah.
A literature review,
focus groups.
And we did all of that in the space of about 5 months while she was postpartum and while Joanna was pregnant.
Oh my God.
And moving to the Arctic. So it was very intense.
To the Arctic?
Yes, she lives up in Iqaluit in Nunavut, which is a Canadian territory.
Wow.
Way up there. Her husband works for our territory government. So
yes,
I don't want to have anything to do with that. None of it.
Yeah. But I think what's the good thing that's come out of it is all of the emails that I get every day. And It's so wonderful to hear you saying that too, Patrick, that women have been coming to you saying that they feel validated. That was the word that was on my heart when I was writing this is, I hope women feel heard. Like, I hope they feel validated. Yes. And every day we get those emails. So that's the biggest plus. The biggest negative is that even though the book is selling great, and counselors are using it, the evangelical establishment is still ignoring us.
Yes.
Which we're not surprised at. That's not a surprising thing, but
I don't think you're just being ignored. I hear there's people getting pretty irritated.
Yes, they are. Because we name names. Like what we did for this book was I had been blogging and writing about marriage and sex for years. Mm-hmm. And I had been doing books on how to have great sex. And it seemed like everyone still had the same issues.
Including longtime readers who say, I get all the good stuff, but I just can't get over this hurdle.
And then in January of 2019, I had a migraine one day. I just didn't feel like working. And I read this conversation on Twitter about this woman saying that she needed respect, not just love. And it reminded me that I had the book Love and Respect in my closet, but I had never read it because I was always so afraid of plagiarizing. So I hadn't read this stuff, So I got the book down, and because I'm like the sex person, I went to the sex chapter and I read that, and it was like a nuclear bomb went off in my living room. And I'm FaceTiming Rebecca and I'm FaceTiming Joanna, and I said, you are not going to believe what he says in this chapter. Like, if your husband is typical, he has a need you don't have. So sex is not about women.
Wow.
A husband has a need for physical release. So it's only about his physical release. It's not about intimacy. If you don't have sex, he's going to have an affair. Most affairs are caused by you not having sex. he'll lust if you don't have sex, and you need to understand his struggle with lust, and you need to validate him in that. And you can't say no. And that was all it said. There was not a single word about women's pleasure or women's experience.
Right. Well, and or the fact that you're setting up an abuse dynamic.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the whole book does that.
Exactly. Right. Anytime you have unconditional respect, you have an abuser's paradise.
Exactly. And
because unconditional respect is not actually respect.
No.
Exactly.
It's just deference.
What it is denial.
Yes.
Yeah.
You have to build the denial system to deny someone's behavior that's harming you.
Yeah, it's teaching women how to gaslight themselves into staying with their
that's exactly right.
So unrespectable husbands.
My grandmother used to have a saying. She was famous for her sayings. She used to say, when you throw a rock into a pack of dogs, the one that yelps the loudest is the one that got hit. So when you hear the yelping, you're on target.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. So, so I read this book, and then we wrote a series of posts on love and respect. We had hundreds of women tell us stories of how that book had abused them. We sent all the stories to Focus on the Family, because I had been on Focus 3 times. I naively thought they were going to listen to me.
Right.
And they totally ignored me. And so we decided to go big or go home. We thought we are just going to do the largest survey that's ever been done in the Christian world. Surveyed 20,000 women, looked at their marital and sexual satisfaction. And then we said, what do you think of all these different evangelical teachings? Do you agree with them? Do you believe them where you taught them? And we were able to see which teachings wreck sex.
Yeah. So we asked, for example, the belief a wife is obligated to have sex with her husband when he wants it. Do you believe this?
Yes.
Like, strongly disagree to strongly agree. So it wasn't, do you think this is right? Do you think this is theologically sound? It was just, do you believe it? Have you heard it? Where from? Right. And so it was so interesting to be able to contrast, for instance, orgasm rates among women who believe something versus women who don't.
Yes.
So it allowed us to actually see where exactly in the evangelical culture, which teachings are the poisons that were making like mom's readers for years come back and say, I love your stuff. This is so helpful. And I feel like I'm 90% of the way there, but there's 10%. I just don't even know what it is, but I can't get over it. We found it.
Yeah.
And it's those beliefs.
Yeah. And then what we did, of course, was we looked at the best-selling marriage and sex books to find where those beliefs are taught. And we identified which books are harmful, and we called those out. And that's why people don't like us.
Yes.
Well, but it's also why I do.
Yeah. Thank you.
Because this is the whole point. Like, we have to have this discussion. I remember having this conversation. Actually, I was able to spend a little bit of time with Eugene Peterson, who's one of my favorite men of all time. And, he wrote a foreword for Rob Bell's book, Love Wins, which was obviously very controversial and still is, right? And all Peterson said was, we would do well to have this conversation.
Yeah.
But because he said that, he was villainized. Like, well, you're not a good person and you're a heretic like him. And so all of that rhetoric and side taking actually then leaves these women that we're talking about, they're in these very difficult circumstances that need help. It leaves them in another predicament. So instead of us having the conversation and being honest about it and not being egomaniacs and actually being able to look at, when you ask, how many, 22,000 you asked?
Yep.
Yeah, 22,000 women. I think it was 20,000 Christian women. Then we had approximately 1,700 non-Christian women as well who used as a control group. There
you go. So that's not an opinion.
Yeah.
That's data of some kind. So but it all started with you reading something which you have a lot of experience with that led you down the road to explore this. So that is what I see as helpful. Now, listen, I've had many beliefs in my life that I regret.
Yeah, me too.
Oh yeah, all of us have.
Yeah, and I'm sure in 5 years I'll say the same thing still about something else. But this is one of the things that I learned from Peterson. He said that God is a God of what he called progressive revelation. Yeah. He's always revealing things. It's never static. It's never stagnant because we couldn't handle all of it all at once anyway.
Yeah.
So this is why there's always a process, right? And why change is a process, not an event.
Yeah.
So the idea that this is happening is really good for our community, the church community. And I'm sure you're also aware of Paul Young, but he wrote The Shack, and he's been villainized. And I was at a meeting with him one time, and somebody came up and just was eviscerating him, like coming at him and being very caustic. And Paul was smiling and was very gracious to the guy. And later backstage, I'm like, Paul, how do you do that? And he said, Pat, here's the deal. Those are my people.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, wow. To have that, they can be totally wrong, but they're also people that just like me were struggling. So when you have this and these things start to happen, what happens is people find out about it. And now people are, Googling to love, honor, and vacuum.
Yeah.
And they're, so this is a beautiful thing. And I want to applaud your courage for not shrinking back and taking it on, because I personally know many people who have been helped by it. Yeah. So I want to talk to you about one thing about this whole process that I've been thinking about and get your take on it. So I believe that the bigger problem we have here is theological. So somebody like Egrich, who's a pastor, he's going to hide behind the scriptures, or his version of interpreting the scriptures and his knowledge of the scriptures, to justify these principles. Right? Yeah. So if you confront that, there's two roads you go. You're not biblically sound. You're out of touch with reality. You're a heretic, whatever. And so how do you have a conversation with that? So if we take the value structure of men and women in the evangelical world, let's just take it from there, nowhere else, okay? And I'm a 30-year veteran of the church, so I was a pastor. I've been here, been there, done that. So our basic model of the world, our basic belief structure, which is what you were eliciting from women, is that men are more valuable than women. Yeah. And if that's the starting point, how do we ever come to a healthy version of relationship?
Yeah. Well, you can't, right? Because we found, and that was one of the big things we found in our study, which is so interesting, is we found that women who said that their opinions or their needs were valued as less than their husbands in their marriages had horrible outcomes for marital and sexual satisfaction. They felt less able to bring up difficult discussions with their husbands. They had lower orgasm rates. They had lower rates of becoming aroused. They had much higher marital dissatisfaction. And among couples where he was the one to unilaterally make the decisions, even if he asked her opinion first, which is once again putting the husband at a authority level over the wife in an actual applicable sense. If he was the one who actually made the decisions, they had I believe it was a 7.4 times higher chance of divorce. Wow. So they divorce at over 7 times higher than couples who made decisions together. So in essence, like collaborative couples. Right.
So if we took just that information right there and we looked at the ripple effect of that, that problem gets immeasurably bigger.
Yep. Yeah, because it's interesting. What we found is that the majority of couples who believe that the husband should make the final decision don't act it.
Yeah, I think it was fewer than 20%.
Yeah. And so it's like believing it didn't seem to be the problem. The problem was people acting it out. And so in the church, what we have is we have a lot of pastors who are preaching this. Preaching that the husband is in authority and he's ultimately responsible for the family and he's to make the final decision. But in that pastor's marriage, he and his wife are functioning like equals. And so they are teaching something which is hurting their congregation.
But they're teaching it why? Because
they honestly believe that's what the Bible says. And one of the things that I went into this project with is something that I'm quite passionate about, is Jesus said that a good tree cannot bear bad fruit and a bad tree cannot bear good fruit. And so you'll know them by their fruit. And so what we tried to say is, okay, look, we've been having these debates about doctrine forever. We've been debating, should men be in authority? Should marriages be equal? And we talk past each other. At this point. And so instead of debating doctrine, let's just look at the data, because we know bad trees can't bear good fruit.
That's
Good
right.
trees can't bear bad fruit. So where is the fruit? And what the fruit is saying is that when you put the husband in an authority position, when you make the husband more important, everything goes downhill from there.
Yeah.
And that is the root of so many problems. In fact, of all of the evangelical teachings that we looked at that harmed, the one umbrella teaching that would go over all of them is that sex is essentially about men and their satisfaction. It's not about women. And then all of the individual things flowed from that.
Doesn't that make perfect sense since the woman doesn't matter?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and listen, if you go back throughout biblical history, the entire Bible, New Testament, Old Testament, the beliefs about women was that they were property. Okay, well, that's clearly incorrect, right?
Yeah.
That's not possible. So then you look at our country's heritage. You have the Puritans founding the country. They set the course of culture from the Christian perspective. Their belief about sex and marriage was that it was only for procreation.
Yeah.
And then after that, you have to sleep in separate rooms so as not to tempt yourself.
I didn't even know that. That's interesting. Yeah.
Like, wait, and they're justifying that belief with the Bible.
Yes.
They also justified the genocide of the Indians with the Bible, but that's another book probably.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, but my point is that you're right. This has been going on for centuries. So this is why I want to shift it from that to in what way is devaluing another person for any reason lead to health?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you know, if you look at Genesis 4, verse 1, which I think is such a funny verse, and I remember I was in junior high when I first noticed this verse. I was sitting with all my friends in the wooden pew, and the pastor read, you know, Adam knew his wife Eve, and they conceived a son, and the whole pew starts shaking because we're all laughing, and my mother's giving me the look and everything. But as I grew up and I looked into that verse, I realized it wasn't that God was embarrassed of using the real word. It was that God was trying to tell us something. You know, that Hebrew word to know is the same word that David uses in the Psalms when he says, search me and know me, O God. It's this deep longing for intimacy.
Yeah. It's
And
not knowledge.
Exactly. It's this deep connection.
Intimacy. Yes.
But if you're going to have a deep connection, it means both people have to matter. You cannot have a deep connection or a deep intimacy if one person is doing all of the giving and one person's doing all of the receiving, because it means the person who's doing all the giving is devaluing themselves.
Yes.
And if you're devaluing yourself, then you're not really sharing who you are. And so there can't be that intimacy.
Right. You become a role. And so, like you said earlier, you start to gaslight yourself. You start to devalue your own opinion. You devalue your own ideas, your own person, and you see yourself as, you know, someone else's place to be made happy.
Yeah, and I think it all has to come down to, when we're talking about this whole from a more theological angle as well, when you look at the books that are currently out there, when you look at the toxic teachings that do teach us to devalue ourselves as women, and, you know, they do teach men to devalue women for their own pleasure, we have to ask, you know, because I think a lot of these books, here's the thing, all these authors who've written these books will say things like, my book has helped so many couples. My book has saved hundreds of thousands of couples. And I have to ask, what is your metric?
Yeah.
Right. When we're looking at the fruit, what fruit are you looking for? Because not all fruit is actually good. Right. Are we measuring the success of books by how many couples don't get divorced?
Yeah.
Because is that a good metric? Or if you're keeping abusive marriages together, that's bad fruit.
A worse metric is how many people are divorced living as married.
Yeah.
They're in a sexless marriage. They don't have any connection. They don't talk. They don't live in the same room. There is no semblance of any sort of marriage, but boy, they're together.
Yeah. Or what is the metric that he gets sex 3 to 4 times a week, regardless of how she's feeling?
Yes.
Is the metric that, you know, she manages to put out enough that he doesn't watch porn? Like what is the metric we're looking at? Because one of the calls of our book is that the metric shifts, that our metric for a successful marriage is no longer about he gets enough and she doesn't leave, The metric is now
Thank
both
you.
of them are experiencing intimacy in a mutually
Yes.
beneficial and mutually like empowering relationship where they can serve Christ together, living out their gifts and their passions and their God-given talents to their fullest.
Right.
You know,
So-
that should be the metric.
That healthy intimacy becomes a place where both of the beauty of each individual is then magnified.
Exactly. Versus you having to make yourself smaller so someone else can be bigger.
Correct. And that teaching has been pervasive in the evangelical community in the last 60, 70 years, all the way back to the Puritans, I would say.
I would say even before that.
Yeah.
I think I read
I'm
that
just
in
talking about in
Augustine. I'm going to
America.
be honest. I think I read that about women in Augustine.
Exactly. Well, where do you think the Puritans got it?
Yeah, exactly.
You know, when you start following this stuff out, like historically, it goes way back. But it started with a Jewish culture that treated women as property.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This is just that light.
Mm-hmm. It is, and somehow people are proud of it, and that's what I don't understand. Like, I don't understand how you can write an entire chapter on sex and never mention a woman's pleasure,
And not see that be a red flag.
and not think, what am I saying about sex? Like, it's really strange. I mean,
And it's difficult to talk about without, you know, going a little bit too far. It's just when there are so many Christian books out there, the sex books, we will say, and we looked at all these books, the books that were specifically about sex really did tend to emphasize that women can orgasm, women should be orgasming, and you should be doing your part together there.
Yeah, with the exception of Every Man's Battle, which we put in the sex section.
Yes.
But
Yeah, that was abysmal.
Yeah.
But the marriage books that discussed sex, many of them just didn't even mention that she can orgasm.
No, and they kept calling sex his release. However, Praying Wife said, he needs release every 72 hours, so give him release. Every Man's Battle said if he doesn't get release, he'll get clouded, give him release. Like, there were several books that used physical release, so his ejaculation, as a synonym for sex.
So they all recognize that the dude can get release, but it just again, what is our metric? Because if our metric is actually a good sex life, I find it very difficult that we can write an entire book without even mentioning that it can feel good for her, unless that's never been the goal.
Well, it's not.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
The goal from the theological perspective is her compliance for his pleasure.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And as a guy who's dealt with thousands of abused women,
Yeah.
let me tell you how powerfully harmful that has been.
Yeah.
I mean, because now you have somebody who's actively abusive, and from my experience, the worst of the abusers are Christian men who have a good look good. And they're the most heinous because they use the Bible to justify their harm. They use it to control. They use it to exploit the community for their benefit. I mean, it's profoundly manipulative, but they're super good Christian men. And having been a therapist for years, do you know how many pastors I've had in my office and heard their secrets and know? So I don't have the delusion that if someone's a Christian or they're a leader, that they're okay.
Yeah.
Like, I've done a little research on Stephen Arterburn. There's pathology there, clearly. Egrich, his father was profoundly abusive.
Yeah.
As somebody who deals with trauma all the time, that stuff doesn't just evaporate because you believe in Jesus.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Jesus becomes a cover for your avoidance. And so if, as a community, if we're going to have a safe place for women to heal in this way, these conversations have to happen.
Yeah. And one of the things that often abusers do when they use the Bible to pressure women into having sex, because that's what people do. They use 1 Corinthians 7, the do not deprive verses, to tell women they don't have a choice, that unless you're praying or fasting, and unless it's mutual consent, you can't say no. So you need mutual consent to say no, but you don't need mutual consent to say yes. That's the way that it's seen. But when I look at those verses, I think the very first question I have is, what is it that we're not depriving each other of? Right? Because people think, well, you're not supposed to deprive each other of sex. And it's like, okay, well, what is sex? Because if we're defining sex as his release,
Yes.
That's very different. And usually when you ask people what is sex and they try to answer, they will describe something to do with intercourse, right? Like he puts this here and moves around till he climaxes. And that's what we think sex is.
Yeah.
But if that's our definition, she could be lying there making a grocery list in her head.
Exactly.
Like not even present. She could be in emotional turmoil, or she could even be in physical pain, and it would count as having sex. In fact, she could even be being forced.
Yes.
And it would count as having sex.
Yes. Right.
And that's why one of the very first things we do in the Great Sex Rescue is say, no, we need a whole new definition of sex.
Yeah.
It's not intercourse. If you look at the Bible, there's several key things we see. And that's that sex is supposed to be intimate, as we already talked about from Genesis 4. It's pleasurable, as we see from Song of Solomon. And that's for both. So it's intimate and it's pleasurable.
As I like to say,
it's mutual.
she is also very excited about meeting under that tree.
Yes.
In Song of Songs.
It was mutual for sure.
Yeah.
So we have something which is intimate, pleasurable, and mutual. That's what you're not supposed to deprive each other of. It's not talking about one-sided intercourse.
No. So,
and if you're having one-sided intercourse, she is already being deprived.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And not just sexually.
Yeah. No, exactly. For like in all kinds. And one of the metrics that we used in our survey too to judge sex was whether or not the couple felt emotionally connected during sex.
Yeah. And obviously we only had it from the woman's perspective because we talked to women, but you know,
Right. So,
the other thing I like to say about that 1 Corinthians 7, and I always like to say this because a lot of people who have had those verses weaponized against them don't know this. They always stop quoting at the end of verse 5.
Yeah.
And this is very convenient because you know what Paul says in verse 6?
Verse 5 is do not deprive each other except
by mutual consent and for a time so that the Satan does not tempt you by your lack of self-control.
Yeah.
Right? So that's verse 5. Verse 6, Paul literally says, I say this as a concession, not as a command. That's verse 6. So anyone who uses 1 Corinthians 7 to say that the Bible says you must, Paul himself, the very next verse says, no, I don't.
Yeah, exactly.
You don't have to.
Right.
It's a concession, not a command.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And that's just how this whole spiritually abusive stuff works, right?
Yeah.
Because they take the parts that they like and they don't leave the rest.
That's exactly right. And let's remember that Paul was in the first century Rome, under occupation, and he had been a staunch Jew that was gotten converted. So you think all of those beliefs that he had magically disappeared? Yeah. He was wrestling through it himself.
Well, 1 Corinthians 7, the actual thing, I'll really quickly from a really quick. The funny thing about that is they were in that church was getting influenced by an asceticism cult.
Yeah.
So all these couples were married and then just not having sex and deciding I'm going to be, celibate even though I am married. And
that was a huge problem in that world, was that asceticism. Because it was worn as a spiritual badge.
It was, but then the other thing too, my prof was saying this when I took a classics course in university, is that a lot of times part of it is also the same way that monks would like prepare food for people while they were fasting. People who are trying to be celibate would also tempt themselves to see just how holy they were. So
that brings me to a point that you said about how we define sex. Right. Yeah. Well, let's go back to the purity culture for a second, and all the millions of people who were going to save themselves till marriage, but did everything but intercourse.
Right. Yes.
But that wasn't sex.
Right. Yes. And then you get married and now you can have intercourse. So therefore, all that other stuff we don't have to do anymore, even though all that other stuff is what brings her to orgasm.
Exactly. I love that you talked about that in the book in detail. About that process, about foreplay being, but when you're talking about something that's relational, that makes a lot of sense. When you're talking about something that's about his orgasm, it doesn't.
Yeah, exactly. And so, I think, what happens for a lot of couples, and we hear this, and I'm sure, any pastor or therapist or even just friends talking about sex hears and say, you know what, like, I know we shouldn't have, but like, we were really kind of like sexual before we got married and it was so good. And then we got married and it was totally blah. Right. And we hear that all the time.
Yes, I do.
And you wonder how much of it is because before you're married, you're not allowed to. And so you spend like 8 hours on a Saturday making out and touching each other and like trying to get each other as amped up as you possibly can. And
you're the monk who's tempting himself.
You have sex after like 8 hours of like, tantric foreplay stuff. And then like, oh, surprising, that felt good. And then, the 5 minutes on the wedding night and afterwards, when you don't have to do the rest of it. Oh, why doesn't she like sex anymore? Well,
So that's such an excellent point, because it's a shift in how we relate.
Yeah.
It's based on what I would say is an unhealthy belief structure.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and it's about, what do we value, right? Do we value the meeting of two souls? Do we value the coming together? Do we value the actually taking time to study and know and I mean, revel in the person who you have? Or is it about just getting to brass tacks, getting what you're coming for, and just getting out? Like, what's the goal?
So many women feel very selfish if they have to ask for foreplay, or if he reaches climax and they're nowhere near aroused yet, or maybe they're a little bit aroused but nowhere near, and then they figure that, well, if I have to ask for something, then I'm being selfish because I should have been able to climax. He could. What's wrong with me? And so many women feel like they're broken. And what we tried to say in the book is, but we need to work with God's design of our bodies.
Yes.
And women's bodies were not made to react to intercourse in the same way that men's are. And that doesn't mean that we're broken. It doesn't mean that we're less than. It doesn't mean that we're frigid. It just means that we need to learn how to ask for what we need. And husbands need to learn to care.
Yes.
Yeah. And they need to learn to act in a way she doesn't have to ask.
And the problem is, like Shanti Feldon in For Women Only, has this chapter on sex where she's talking about how what a man really needs is your emotional involvement. He doesn't just need release, which is actually good that she said this.
Yeah.
Like she said, what he really needs is for you to feel like you want to be there, like you're enjoying yourself and everything, which actually was I had no problem with that. But then she said, so if you find yourself not able to physically respond, let your words be heart words, adoring, reassuring, affirming. And so if you're not getting turned on, you're supposed to keep reassuring him so that he gets what he needs.
And so once again, it's like what you were talking about, where we are transformed from people with real experiences and real emotions to simply a role to fill.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
And women's role is to make men feel sexually competent, even if they are not performing for her.
Yeah.
Right. And so I've done a lot of marriage counseling in my years. And this is something that I have learned over time. I would have been the pastor that would have said all of this horrible advice. Now I realize, like, the relational intimacy of two people has more to do with sex than anything else. But what you have in the church is you have people being trained out of intimacy.
Yes.
And into roles.
Yeah.
So the interplay of two people being healthily interdependent, right, and mutual, that can't happen if your job is to make me happy. That can't happen if your job is to do everything so that I'm not upset.
Yes.
Which is the basic message we've sent, that between men and women, that's the role. So when a woman walks into a pastor's office, she's already the problem. And I've seen this 1,000 times, but I've seen it once. And the damage that does to the spirit of a soul, I can tell you, is hard to undo. And so that consequence is one of the things I'm wanting to try to put light on, because so many women, I tell this analogy all the time. So you go to your favorite breakfast place and you see the old couple sitting in there, and they're 60, 70, 80 years old, and they never say a word, and they don't look at each other, and they're miserable.
Yeah.
But they're still together. And praise the Lord, they're a good example of how marriage is supposed to work. And what I always tell women is, like, the only way you get to that place is by avoiding conflict.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So my favorite quote from M. Scott Peck, the avoidance of pain is the beginning of all unhealthy behavior.
Yes.
Right? So when we, in the church, we're teaching avoidance.
Yes.
We're teaching avoidance in avoidance and in its place we have compliance.
I mean, that's the entire premise of every man's battle.
Yes.
He should never have to experience real sexual temptation. So make sure that you fill up his satiety for sex so that he doesn't turn elsewhere.
Yeah. Right.
Like,
and talk about blame shift. I mean, like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
I just have this horrible drive to have sex with everything, and it's your job to make sure I don't get out of control.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It literally calls women methadone. It says once he quits porn and lust,
Be like,
a merciful vial of methadone for him. And when he used to, he's supposed to transfer all of his sexual energy from lusting after everyone else to lusting after his wife. And so when he used to come to you for 5 bowls of sexual gratification a week, now he'll come to you for 10 bowls. And this is supposed to make her happy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I would
Right.
just say, like, there's just a fundamental misunderstanding of how female sexuality works. If it's like, ooh, he wants to look at porn, but he'll settle for you as long as you put out enough. And I'm like, ooh, yeah, that is
So
put it in your wedding vows, baby.
Yeah.
Like, that's just.
Well,
But I think what we're doing there is we're giving boys this message, because so many teenagers read Every Young Man's Battle too. And the only solution that we're giving 2 solutions. I shouldn't say the only one. The one of the solutions is bounce your eyes. So never look at a woman, because women are dangerous. Women are objects. Never see them as a whole person. Just bounce your eyes. And then 2, as soon as you're married, every time you have a sexual feeling, have sex with your wife to deal with it. Mm-hmm. And so I get emails from women saying, my husband wants sex 3 times a day. And I think that man has been taught that if I ever have any kind of sexual feeling, I have to ejaculate into my wife, or else I'm going to lust and sin after another woman. And so it's okay for me to treat my wife like an object. Yeah. Because that's what she's here for.
Well, it's also a service to her, because you're not doing it to other women. At least she's the only one who you're treating like an object. That's a service to her.
I'm actually being spiritual.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I now have a noble cover over my usury of another person.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel superior spiritually because that's what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is tragic.
Yeah.
For both people.
Yeah.
Because there's no way that sexual activity is satisfying to anyone.
No.
Other than
and
the
it's so
ejaculation.
sad. Well, and it's so sad when you consider how young these boys are when they start hearing this message. Like, boys are hearing this as young as 10, 11, 12. And you've got to wonder just how much anxiety it puts in boys about their own, sexual arousal cycle.
Let's not even talk about the shame that's embedded in a woman.
Yeah.
When your only value is not, if once you have sex, you've lost all your value.
Goodness.
You're no longer precious. Now you're damaged goods.
Yep.
Like that shame base is so profound. But Josh Harris, he came to grips with the fact that was terrible advice.
Mm-hmm.
I so have such respect for him for coming out and saying I was wrong.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's
good.
Us too.
What's that?
I said we are completely agree.
And honestly, I believe that's a great model to follow. I've apologized for a lot of things I've said in the past. Like you said, you used to teach a lot of this stuff too, and then you stop, and it's not a big deal.
Mm-mm.
Like, I have taken down blog posts, I've taken down podcasts, I've reworked books. It's seriously not a big deal. You just say, wow, I got that wrong.
Yeah.
I apologize. I've grown. Here's what God's been teaching me now. And people don't mind. And so all I'm doing is I'm calling on these authors that have said really harmful things.
That you clearly document.
Yeah. Like, just apologize.
Yeah.
People would really trust them more if they did.
Right. Well, but we have this problem in the church where you can't touch God's anointed.
Yes.
That's why Ravi was out of control.
Mm-hmm.
That's why Ted Haggart was found in the bathroom with a male prostitute and crack.
Yeah.
These things don't happen overnight.
No.
It's a long-term pattern of denial and rationalizing, spiritualizing, justifying, minimizing. Every good, deep secret requires profound denial. Back to M. Scott Peck's quote, the avoidance of pain is the beginning of all unhealthy behavior. So what we have is a system that encourages secrecy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so,
and I think the other thing this system really encourages, especially in men, is entitlement. It really teaches that men are entitled to sex. And so that's what men are taught, is that when you get married, your sexual needs will be met. That's what your wife is for. What women are taught is you are obligated to give him sex when he wants it. And turning something which is supposed to be intimate into an obligation is actually highly traumatic.
Yes.
And we have the numbers for that. We have the proof of that. because the believing the obligation sex message has almost the same statistical effect on increasing the rate of the chance that you'll have vaginismus or sexual pain as prior abuse does.
Wow.
So let me, because I know that's a
I get
handful
it,
to
but please
understand.
do unpack that.
Let me unpack that. So if people have abuse in their past, we naturally can figure out that, yeah, it seems logical that when you have sex, you're more likely to have pain. And vaginismus is primary sexual pain. It's a sexual dysfunction women can suffer from, where the walls of the vagina contract and can't relax, and it makes penetration really painful, if not impossible. And we have known for like 50 years that conservative Christians have vaginismus at twice the rate of the general population. It's been in gynecological journals. Like, we knew this. And so one of the things we wanted to figure out in our survey is why. Like, what is it about this? And we discovered that the obligation sex message has one of the hugest impacts. And like I said, it's almost statistically the same as abuse, which means that our bodies interpret that message in the same way as if it's trauma.
Because it is.
But yeah, because both abuse and obligation sex say you don't matter.
Well, yes, you don't matter, and you don't have a choice.
Yeah.
About my own body?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the level of shame and trauma that's involved in that. But I think it's even worse when it's said from God.
I agree.
Yeah.
And that's why we need to be careful what we're saying in our women's Bible studies, in our small groups, because a lot of times what's happening is similar to what we said about the whole hierarchy issue, is there's women who are running these small groups who are in truly wonderful marriages to very gentle, kind, compassionate men who will say things like, it's our job to, provide sexually for our husbands, because for them, it truly is a joy, because they're married to a good man. And so they can say things like, you're obligated to have sex, but they don't feel obligated, because they know, they can rest assured knowing that if she said no, he would honor that and say, oh, I'm sorry you're feeling bad. Do you want a back rub instead? Right. But then in that small group, you have a woman whose husband is controlling, whose husband is trying to force her to do things that she's not comfortable with. To a husband who is, waking her up in the middle of the night, even though she has a baby who he refuses to get up and feed, by the way, because, he got, ready to go at 2:00 in the morning. And she hears this and she thinks, what is wrong with me that I can't do this?
Exactly.
What is so wrong with me? And that's why we need to be careful. And this is why data is so important, because there's a lot of women out there who are really trying to help. They're trying to build up marriages. And there's a lot of authors out there who are trying to build up marriages, and a lot of pastors out there and well-meaning folks who hand off these books, who start those discussions, who, send around a Bible study plan. And they're not thinking about, what does this look like when you're not married to a good, kind, compassionate man?
Yeah.
And you're so right, because, for years I've told women in abusive relationships that people say that we judge each other, or we should maybe know someone by the fruit of their spirit. And I'm like, no, I don't think that's a good idea, because in the situation you're describing, every abusive man that I've dealt with is a master at faking the fruit of the spirit. The fruit of the spirit, love, joy, peace, gentleness, kindness, self-control, all those things can be faked. Okay. But what can't be faked is care. When someone genuinely cares, that's revelatory. If somebody has all the look good in the church, we are suckers for that. They look good. They say the right words. They're good prayer. They got a lot of Bible verses. They went to Bible college. They can preach, blah, blah. They can worship. They can play the guitar. So it's like watching a movie. We just employ suspension of disbelief. But the damage. And I've spent 30 years. This is one of the things I say, look, I don't think you have the right to point out the dirt unless you're willing to wash the feet. I've been washing the feet of the church for 30 years. I've been picking up the pieces of people's harm to each other. And so I know at a deep level that this is not a small problem. And this is not a the consequences of this are not small. It's epidemic in proportions to the quality of life. The number of women that I have spoken to who live in hell.
Yeah.
But not really.
Yeah.
Because they can't say anything.
Yeah.
Or they'll be shouted down by the elder or the pastor because they're supposed to service their husband or whatever. And so I am so grateful to hear you saying these things. And I think it's amazing that you're saying it as a woman.
Yeah.
And that you're not backing down. And it's just so good because the healing that's going to come from it, I think is going to, just like the bad message has ripples, this is going to have ripples, already does. People are already finding freedom. And I've got a bunch of women in my program who've already experienced freedom from just being validated by this. And they're in abusive relationships, and it's providing courage for them to start to move, because the sexual relationship is an evidence of the abuse.
Yeah.
So they can stop being in denial.
Yeah.
But spiritualized denial is the worst.
Yeah.
And that's what I think you're actually addressing on the issue of sexuality.
I think that was a bit of the goal. Yeah.
I mean, let me give you one more. This is just such a good example, and it's one that makes me the most angry. But Kevin Lehman in sheet music, he calls her period a difficult time for husbands.
I'm familiar with this.
And so he tells the story of a woman who, after 10 years, finally figured out that just simply giving him oral sex or a hand job during her period would help him withstand his pornography temptation. And so this was a great thing to do. And I just find the gall of calling her period a difficult time for the husband is unbelievable. Right. And then later he says, many women have found that in the postpartum time, or if they have heavier periods, or if they're simply not feeling their best, they can give him a hand job when he's ready to climb the walls. And telling a woman who has just had your child and who is getting used to breastfeeding and who isn't sleeping and who maybe has postpartum depression, that what you really need to do is give him a hand job. Like, where is the care towards her?
Doesn't exist.
Or if she's sick, if she's not feeling well, she can give him a hand job. So if she's sick, she should just, I mean, it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Well, but you think about the belief structure involved, which is like, let's just say she's as happy and as healthy and as sexually ready as she can be. That still doesn't make sense. Let alone she's having difficulty. I mean, if any of those difficulties are there, that principle in itself is inerrant. I mean, it's errant. No one is obligated to give you a hand job. Unless you gave them money.
Yeah.
And so this is the thing that I hear all the time. I've heard 1,000 women say this in their marriages. I feel like a prostitute.
Yeah.
Yep. We hear that all the time as well.
You know why? Because you are.
Yep.
That's why you feel that way.
Well,
it's
he even describes it that way. He says, how would you feel if your husband stopped supporting you, stopped giving you part of the paycheck? It's the same as if you stopped giving him sex. So he's still equating the paycheck with sex in sheet music.
Right.
So icky.
It's crazy. And so, but, I talk to a lot of women who read those books and are like, well, I'm going to try this, I'm going to try that, and I'm going to try this, because they are desperate.
Yeah. Well, women for so long, from, like you said, from the age of 10, 11, 12, we are told that our identity is in our virginity and what we have to offer men sexually, right? And then, we are told from, the minute we get your first training bra as a girl, that you're now a temptation to men and you are the problem, right? You are dangerous, and the men around you, including the 60-year-old men who are on the elders board, need to be protected from you and your small little prepubescent bosoms. And then, you start dating and you get engaged and you get married to this man, and now he has you sexually, and you've given him your quote unquote most precious gift, the chocolate bar, the pearl necklace, the gummy bears, the whatever your particular youth group.
Insert analogy here.
Yes, exactly. And so you've done that now, and things are still not okay. But how can you leave when you've been told your whole life that your identity is in sexually performing for one man for the rest of your life? And you've done everything, quote unquote, right, a lot of these women. And so to divorce now would be to erase 35 years maybe of indoctrination of where your identity and your worth is in. And what they say is your worth is in Christ, but what they mean is your worth is in your hymen or who took it.
Yes.
Right. And so we need to change the conversation about sex. We need to change the conversation about where women stand in their relationships. We need to change the conversation about our worth as human beings and what it means to be an image bearer of Christ. So I think if we're able to hit it at the root, if we're able to tell women, hey, you were never meant to fill a role of being a methadone vial. You were never meant to fill the craving for porn that an addicted husband has. You were never meant to be the numbing agent for a man's sexual, sexually deviant appetite.
Yeah.
And if we're able to say that to women, it also gives them permission to say, you are more than what you have to offer sexually. You are more than your sexual past. You are more than what other people have done to you. You don't have to apologize for what you've done or who you are, or what's been done to you, because you have value, point blank.
End of story. Yes, you do. And that's one of the main things I end up teaching is intrinsic value.
Yeah.
Without intrinsic value, you have no courage to change. So when you think about it, when you have the creator of the universe, quote unquote, from the lips of some people telling you that you have no value unless you fit this certain, and again, like I said, it depends on, modern research reveals that there are roughly 30,000 denominations of Christianity.
Yes, but yeah.
And they're all saying the same thing, right? Which is we have the truth of God from the Bible.
Right.
Well, clearly that's not true at 30,000. So what you have is 30,000 fractals, disparagences. So where one woman might be said she needs to pray more, another one might be told she has to, go to these, Pentecostal meetings to get her hands laid on her and anointed with oil, and then everything will go away. But I find it interesting that we talk about the Bible a lot, but I find it interesting that God never said a cross word to David or Solomon about sex. All he said was, just not foreign women.
Yeah.
You can have as many of these women as you want. That's the implication. So there's a culture there that was in the ancient world. When David took Bathsheba, nobody was surprised. Everybody knew that was the king's right.
Yeah.
Right? And he sent servants to go get her. That's a cultural belief that women were property. And we have evangelicalized it, if you will. It's a terrible mantra of the Jewish community from history. I don't know where they're at today because I'm not up on it. But my point is the devaluation of anyone in that way, sexually, culturally, work-wise, whatever, is always going to lead to harm. And so when we value each other, and what you're saying very clearly is like a woman's value has nothing to do with her sexuality.
Yeah.
And if it does, there's a problem, right? And what you've done in your book, I think, has done I think it's the beginning of a long conversation because these things are going to keep coming around. And, the only thing that will enable us to get away from it is to talk about what's really happening, like the honest conversation. And so while Mark, gosh, I don't want to maybe go into this, but I listened to the phone conversation with Mark Gungor and Lexi.
Lexi.
Yeah.
If you ever see this, can I just say you are an amazing soul. I was so proud of her in that conversation, but man, that was pathological.
Oh yeah.
The pathology of those responses. I deal with, I don't want to say it maybe publicly, but that was sad.
Yeah.
And if that's a leader who's teaching people about how to be married, mishandled an abuse case as obvious as that, and the identity, the ideas and the approach is so revelatory of that devaluation. Lexi didn't have any value in his eyes.
No.
And that's a tragedy. Now we're blaming the victim. Another abuse tactic.
Yeah. And what's interesting too is the authors that we've criticized, the response from them has been, well, I didn't go about this in a kingdom way.
Like talking about mom.
Yeah, I should have gone to them because, I've done this battle. And so they're portraying themselves as the victims.
Which is, again,
and what I'm trying to say is, you're not the victim and I'm not the victim. The victim are all of the women who have heard this teaching and who have really been harmed.
Yes.
And we need to stop thinking that we're entitled to something just because we're leaders. And we need to start thinking about the sheep.
Yes. Well, again, my mantra is, if you value the person, you wouldn't do that.
Yep. And that's why we just need to ask, what is our metric for a successful marriage ministry, for a successful marriage? But also, what is our true value for each of us individually? What are we actually valuing? Because if we are valuing caring for the sheep, if we are valuing being a church that goes after the lost one, if we are valuing being a church where people are safe and where people are seen as the image of God and where people are empowered and humanized,
right,
then our actions will be very different than if our value is in selling books and keeping our egos big. And frankly, and I will say this publicly because it's been like almost 3 months since our book came out, I have only seen the value being protect myself, protect my image, protect my book sales, protect my ego from these authors. I haven't seen any more than one author who has actually shown any interest in changing what they say to protect the people who they are speaking to. And unfortunately, that author, who's been quite encouraging, hasn't given us express permission to say which one it is, so not going to, but there was one, which was very encouraging.
Right. So how about other places outside of the church? Are you getting any feedback from outside of the church?
Oh, ex-evangelicals love us.
Ex-evangelicals love us, yes. And you know what? That's actually,
I love it. Yeah.
I
love that.
I find that an interesting space to be occupying,
But Jesus hung out with all of the people who the religious elite harmed and cast away and who weren't following with the, religious tradition of the day.
And I think they are just so excited that someone's calling this out. I'm excited that I can say, hey, I still believe in God, but you are totally right. Like, I can validate them too.
Yeah.
Like, you were right to think this was crazy.
And frankly, if that's the God that you were given, then you were right to leave.
I wouldn't believe in him either.
Right? It's like, I do hope that a lot of people who have left the church because they've only ever been exposed to toxic, cultish Christianity are able to discover true Jesus love. But if you were fed that, like, frankly, we're not going to blame you for leaving. I actually think that shows a lot of self-preservation instinct.
Yeah.
Because it was never of God anyway. It was never of God anyway.
All of the younger people that I've talked to, the purity movement was one of the big reasons that sent them out.
Yeah.
Once they got old enough to start living a life that was more adult, they started to see the disparagence between what they were taught and reality. And then they were like, well, what else was I lied to about?
Yeah.
And then it's a cascade of, and then you got, a symphony of opinion.
Yeah.
Because, truth is hard to find in these, who is God? Well, I don't know.
Well, and if all you've been fed all your life from the church is harmful rhetoric versus actually the ability to see God in a nuanced way throughout and in every situation, and grace and compassion, true grace and compassion, not like what you were saying, the whole facade of we're a grace-filled church, which means, we are so graceful. So if you come in as an abusive spouse, we're probably going to give you a lot of grace, abusive spouse. But anyway, that was, but
I certainly understand what you're saying.
Because you know what I'm talking about. But if you have the youth of my generation, right? Because I'm quite young. I know that. But my generation that really grew up in Josh Harris movement, in the Brio magazine movement, in the purity culture movement.
You were in the dead center of it.
Oh yeah. But we grew up with this idea of a Christianity that was sound bites and rules. And you don't get anywhere with sound bites and rules. Now I had them, so I was fine.
Yeah.
But when that's what our youth were raised with.
Mm-hmm.
And it is all about control. It's all about making sure that we control exactly how people think,
Mm-hmm.
not just teach them about truths. And so what we're trying to do with this book, we're trying to do with our conversation is get out of, the sound bites, the control, the rules, and start talking about how do you act like Jesus's hands and feet, and how do you recognize when someone is not being like Jesus to you.
Mm-hmm.
And you're allowed to not settle for anything less.
Mm-hmm.
Amen. I'm on 100% agreement with you.
Yeah.
All right. I really appreciate you ladies' time. Again, everybody, you got to go find this.
Great Sex Rescue.
I'm just noticing that we actually match the cover.
Yeah, we do match the
I
cover.
didn't realize that. Look at that.
Yeah.
Synergy on a high level.
Yeah.
I've really enjoyed my time. Again, I am very grateful for what you've done. And I've talked to many other women who are getting a lot of healing. And so may you be greatly successful in your endeavor to change the conversation.
Well, thank
I'll
you.
do what I can to continue to help.
Thank you so much.
You bet.